History of Aviation podcast with Derrick Beeler, David Rowe, and David Gorman.
Hello, friends, and welcome to the History of Aviation podcast for this listener request episode. And as always, I'm joined by Mr. David Rowe and Dave Gorman. What we got for this listener request, guys?
It is the Horten Ho 229, the world's first flying wing. Pretty amazing bit of technology here that was developed in the 1930s. And during World War II, the Nazis were looking for wonder weapons, and the Horten brothers had the idea, and the German government decided we need one of these. And so they put it under contract and started building an amazing little airplane.
They really did. And again, you think about the time of the design. You know, coming out of World War I, there were a lot of restrictions on military aviation in what was left of Germany. They were restricted in terms of the Navy and their Luftwaffe. But there was a lot of secret development that was going on, and a whole lot of stuff that was happening with gliders. So the Hortens kind of got their feet wet with gliders, like a lot of people. Testing, just like the Wright brothers, testing out different ideas and shapes and wing the controls and everything. And so kind of fascinating. This is a real what could have been type of story. Ultimately not successful in terms of what the Hortens were able to do during the war. But, we're fortunate enough to have some of the remains on display. And you can certainly ponder what might have been.
Now, absolutely, the Horten brothers actually started building aircraft in their house. They called it a lounge room, which I assume is their den in their house. They had other members of those flying clubs and a motorcycle club involved in building these gliders. So, I mean, it was kind of a group effort. They had the ideas. They got a group of people together, and they just started testing out different ideas. I mean, some of the early gliders, it's a flying wing, and it's got, you don't even have a cockpit. It's just some windows in the leading edge of the wing, and the pilot would lay on his belly, I assume, and fly through these windows in the very front of the wing. Pretty amazing thing. I saw some videos of them dragging it up into the air, and sure enough, this sucker flies. It's just an amazing idea from the 1930s that they just didn't have the technology, the computers, and everything they needed to make it work. But ultimately, we've proved them correct.
Well, you think about flying wings, and you're familiar with the development of military flying wings with the U.S., but we certainly didn't corner the market on it. This is considered a tailless airplane, right?
Correct. There's no vertical surfaces. There's no rudder. There's literally nothing sticks up, and so one of the drawbacks of having nothing vertically in the air is you have adverse yaw. The plane wants to skid side to side. And apparently the fact that the Horten brothers decided to go with a bell-shaped wing, that nice curve at the back of the wing, that solved the problem of the aerodynamics, making it stable and not having adverse yaw.
It took me a long time just growing up and thinking about military things and learning about history of World War II to look at what was happening in the Axis countries with any level of, those guys had some good designs. I mean, obviously from a political standpoint and system and everything, just horrible and nothing worthy of respect. But they did have some designs that stood the test of time and more than matched up evenly, and even maybe beyond some of the Allied aircraft. Thinking about these guys creating, as you said, flying wing and all the design phases and steps that they had to go through at a time when, again, officially military aviation in Germany was very frowned. They were allowed trainers and obsolete things, and secretly they were building what became the ME-109s. But at the time in the 30s, you had Ernst Udet flying racing aircraft and single engine, high speed, air race aircraft that were masquerading and testing things that later we saw featured in some of their military aircraft. But the flying wing was head and shoulders, very different from what a lot of other manufacturers in the world were doing at that time.
Well, here's the interesting thing. We've mentioned the Horten brothers. Let me give you some background on them real quick. There were three brothers. What is it? Raymar and Walter, and there was a third brother. The third brother actually died at Dunkirk in battle in a bomber. So Walter and Raymar were the two main designers for the Horten, but they were not traditional college trained aerodynamicists. They were a couple of kids in a house trying out designs in a flying club. They were not traditionally trained, and they were actually frowned upon by the establishment. So they were bucking the trend in just about every way. Their designs were not traditional. They weren't from a traditional background, and yet their ideas were solid. They had good instincts for design, and, they were committed to it and, proceeded to design something that ultimately almost worked.
Well, and, the test aspect of what they were designing and the iterations it went through as they learned incrementally about, as you mentioned, that shape of the bell-shaped wing, as they learned what was going to work in terms of giving stability and control. That wasn't a foregone conclusion. There wasn't research that said, "Oh, this will work." They had to figure that out, and they're doing it with gliders, and they're doing it in their house. So
right.
Again, they came pretty close. I mean, there was Derrick and I were talking before we started just about how there was a lot of interesting projects and far out things that weren't going to be successful, but there were a lot of distractions in the German military industry. And it may be that time just ran out on this design, and the war was not going well by the time this thing first flew. I think, was it 1943 when it first flew?
Yeah, I believe some of the earliest design, it was a glider, was like in 1943. But you're right, because they didn't have materials. I mean, this plane is steel tube and wood. They used for glue, they put charcoal and sawdust in the glue because that was all they had to bind it together with. I mean, they were literally scraping the bottom of the barrel to build this thing because, the war was not going their way and it would soon be over.
Well, and, we were taking over control of the skies and being able to bomb factories and supply chains and raw materials and things like that. There were planes being built in caves and, tunnels and things like that where they could be, hopefully shielded. Their plan was to be shielded from Allied bombers and things. But I mean, it was just a remarkable design. And I've been to Udvar Hazy a couple of times in DC, and I've been looking for progress. When they first put this thing on display, I guess it was a year or two before I was up there to see it for myself. And I just kind of walked around taking it in like, what in the heck? This thing had, Dave, you got the picture behind you. I could see the engine pod that's exposed, but the picture I have behind me shows a artist's rendition of what it might have actually looked like. And it was, it was a very sleek, dynamic design. Really fantastic. And so looking at it in pieces with a lot of missing pieces at the Smithsonian, you just got to wonder what if they had everything they needed.
Well, exactly. I mean, it could have been, impressive. The speeds that they were talking about were, 500, 600 miles an hour, which were much faster than any piston aircraft.
Yeah.
There was no Mustang that was going to catch this thing, much like the ME-262. I mean, when it's under power and going, you couldn't touch it. The only place that they could shoot down an ME-262 was on takeoff or landing, where it was slow. I mean, if it was in the sky, you either got lucky or you missed it.
Yeah. And you were like, what was that?
Exactly. Yeah. What was that smoky trail that just went by?
So the Hortons were working on this before there was really a need. I mean, as far as design. But then the need developed, and Hermann Göring said that he wanted there were 3 different 1,000 numbered things that he wanted.
They called it the 3x1,000 project.
Yeah.
And that's exactly right. They wanted 1,000-pound bomb capacity, 1,000 miles an hour or 1,000 kilometers an hour, and a range of 1,000 kilometers. And that was the 3/1000s. And
I think it was 620 miles an hour is what that would.
Right. Yeah. It was all in kilometers. So, we're us Americans in our imperial and not metric.
It's so easy. But, if they were successful at that, what could have happened with the course of the war if they had that ability to strike back? And after the early, maybe by 42, 43, they were no longer bombing England. Regularly bombing England, I don't think. We rested that control.
Not regularly, no.
Yeah. So, if they had something that could reach London easily at those speeds and that bomb load, it could have changed the outcome of the war.
Well, it's amazing that the Germans were very much in the terror thought, the demoralizing the population of England, and as opposed to strategic bombing, bomb factories, right. bomb war making things. They felt like if you demoralize the opposition, that you would win the war, and that has been proven to not be the case. The British were highly resilient, and we're not going to give in regardless of what you dropped on them. So
back in the late 70s, early 80s, I saw an air show up in Dayton, and there was a P-51 there that was beautiful. It was owned by a guy named, I think it was Hess-Bomberger or Haas-Bomberger, who was from Georgia. But it had diamonds on the cowl with the red and blue design, and it was called Vergeltungswaffe. And I had a poster of it and saw it myself in person, took pictures. I'm like, that's such a cool design. I've seen, it's since it's flying as something else now. But it was so cool. And I didn't know what Vergeltungswaffe meant. And I ended up working with a guy who had, knew some German. And I'm like, what does this mean? He goes, oh, that's a vengeance weapon. Well, that's what they call it. That's what V1 and V2, that's Vergeltungswaffe 1, the V1
yes.
and the V2 rockets. That's what that word means. And you're right about the terror inflicted by some of those things. And Derrick and I were talking again about the distractions that they had and the things that they that they tried to make other weapons do. The ME-262 is a bomber.
Exactly. What were they thinking?
Well, they just had a lot of horrible ideas, obviously, and also some, not very good leadership and military expertise when it came to some of the things that they thought they were going to be able to do. Thank goodness.
Yeah, absolutely. They, just, when you blindly follow someone, you end up in a blind corner, apparently. So, just not.
Now, this plane that is at the Smithsonian, actually, it was flown there. Is that correct? A German pilot during the war flew it over to the U.S. Is that correct?
That is not correct. That was
not correct. Okay, Bruce had said that's how it got there, and I just wanted to fact check that.
Yeah, as a matter of fact, the one that's at the Udvar Hazy is the only remaining example of the Horten 229. There were 3 versions. The first one, the version 1, was the glider. and I believe it flew multiple times, and it eventually crashed. The second version was jet powered. They had a UMO 004B engine in it, which is the same engine that the 262 and the Arado 234 used. And it flew 3 times, I believe. And on the third flight, as the pilot, an Edwin Ziller, was coming into land, the engine quit, and he struggled with it to try and land it. But one of the things I read about a flying wing is if you lose an engine, it becomes almost uncontrollable very quickly. And so he crashed.
I think it caught fire, didn't it?
Well, I believe it did, because they were talking about the pilot was possibly unconscious due to the fumes from the fire. So, that's a very tightly cowled engine. So, early design, and the plane crashed. He survived for 2 weeks before passing away from his injuries. So they went on to the third version, which is the one that we have here in the United States at the Udvar Hazy. And it was the third prototype. It was under construction, and Patton's Army overran the Gotha factory where it was being built, and they captured it there. But what they captured was just the center section, the cockpit and the engines. There were no wings. The wings were found a few days later, about 75 miles away, at one of those hidden sites that you were talking about, where, aircraft were built in pieces and then brought together and assembled in one location. So this aircraft never flew, was not complete. There were 4 that they found together at the Gotha plant. This was the most complete of the 4, and it was the only one that they kept. So the other ones that they found were a 2-seat. The version 4 was a 2-seat version. The version 5 was going to be a night fighter. The version 6 was going to be an armament test prototype. And there was plans for a 7th version that would be a 2-seat trainer. But because this was the only complete one, that's what they brought back. As a matter of fact, they took it to England, to Farnborough, and the British were going to test it. They even looked at putting a British engine into it to try to fly it, to put it together and fly it. But the British engine, if you've ever seen their engines, they use a centrifugal feed jet engine. So it's got a big round center section, and it wouldn't fit inside that plane because the cockpit area is only about 3.5 feet tall. It's very short. Very small. It stands about 9 feet in the air when you put the wheels down, but the actual cockpit area is only 3.5, maybe 4 feet tall. So anyway, the British couldn't put an engine in it, couldn't fly it. They sent it to Wright-Patterson in the United States. And there were plans, I read, to actually fly it here in the States, but I'm assuming that they couldn't figure out how to get it put together and get all the systems working, and it never happened. So
probably a good thing they didn't.
I absolutely. There's probably somebody getting hurt because it just, without having the people that knew it, I don't think they could have pulled that one off. It was just too radical.
Well, so it's pretty fascinating, your history there, and I forget when the third or the second version crashed. Was that in 44 or 45?
It was February of 45, February the 18th of 1945.
So a lot happening there, and but you said Patton's Army actually captured this model, and then Operation Paperclip, it was collected and brought back and everything.
Correct.
I think it's Paperclip. Is that right? I think it is.
Yes, that's correct.
But this was still an active program. I mean, these planes were under construction until they couldn't be anymore. It sounds like, right?
Exactly. They were working on them up to the very end.
So despite that crash of the second version, they were still working towards getting these in the air, weren't they?
Correct. They were very satisfied with the flying characteristics of that second, the V2 model, that it flew well, it was controllable. Obviously an engine going out and catching on fire is not a flying issue, it's a mechanical issue. So that's just one of the things you have to figure out. What I did read is the version 3 was a slightly larger aircraft. They were expanding it, making it bigger. But yeah, they were happy with it and wanted to continue building them.
Well, and I think you mentioned these were the same engines as found on the ME-262. And if I recall about those, they were getting changed out after 10 hours of flight. Very
short lives.
I mean, maybe they were considered reliable for the time, but very, very regular turnover for those things. So
the original idea was to have a BMW jet engine in it, but they apparently couldn't get it working in time, so they reverted to the UMO engines. So the version 2 had that 004B, and then the one that is at the Udvar was going to have an 004C engine, which was like 10% better, more efficient, but it never actually got the chance to fly.
Do you remember reading, do we have some documentation on this from the Horten brothers lived a long time after the war.
They absolutely,
I was surprised.
Yeah, exactly. Walter ended. Walter, let me tell you about Walter real quick. So he flew in the Battle of Britain. Apparently he flew as Adolf Galland's wingman and was credited with 7 British aircraft shot down. He joined the Luftwaffe post-war and, stayed in Germany and flew in Germany and lived until the 80s and passed away. And then Raymar, he went to Argentina and continued working on flying wings down there, but I don't think he had a lot of success because there's not really an aviation industry in Argentina.
Right.
And so he passed away a couple of years before Walter did. So, yeah, these guys lived a long time, and they talked a lot in the past about it. So, and one of the things that was talked about is sort of the myth of this being a stealth fighter or bomber. From what I read, this was never intended to be stealthy. It was just a feature of the shape of the fact it's a flying wing. That the stealth aspects of the flying wing are just natural, that the Horten brothers weren't specifically trying to design something to counteract the British radar, the chain home radar that they had. So
radar was still, not exactly in its infancy, but there was still a lot to be learned about, having it operational.
Yeah, exactly.
And everything. There were so many other things they were trying to make this aircraft do that I guess stealthiness was maybe low on the list of things, keeping it airborne, having reliable engines,
right? Yeah.
Things like that. That's the important stuff. So,
right. Well, and Northrop, we haven't talked about. I was thinking of this. The Horten 229 is kind of the great granddaddy of the stealth bombers that we have today, because it sort of set the stage for what the Northrop designers, the YB-49, Northrop was trying to build their own flying wing. And, this was just step after step. And, Northrop actually built a replica of the Horten 229 and tested it for, stealthiness. And like I said, it was naturally stealthy, but it wasn't super stealthy. It wasn't designed to be that way.
Yeah, there was a Northrop plane that they built, one of those early one-person flying wings that they had one that had propellers.
Yes.
And I just looked it up, the Northrop N9M, and I never remember what that was called. But, there was one that was still flying from Chino up until a couple of years ago and was tragically lost. Yeah. But shape-wise, it looks significantly like the Horten. So those guys were paying attention, and there was a lot of cross-pollination with some of those ideas, I'm sure.
Well, we've got the B-2 Spirit and the B-21 Raider. You put them side by side, and you can see the family resemblance. There's an obvious growth of here's a design, we can use it for a stealthy aircraft. Let's build off of that, and it's proven that the Horten brothers were on to something extremely smart.
Well, I know that Jack Northrop, before he died, he was shown the B-2, which I don't guess had been released or anything, had been announced, or maybe it hadn't flown, but they showed it to him so he could see what was happening, and he was very proud knowing that the heritage of his early designs was going to live on. I don't know if the Hortons ever had that same sense of legacy. You don't hear their names a lot in this country in terms of aviation design, but certainly they deserve a place, and that this aircraft, what's left of it, is at the Smithsonian. So right there tells you that
You'll see it right there.
It's worthy of a spot on the floor, and as they continue to restore what they have and maybe craft some of what they don't have and put it together, it'll be fascinating to see it one day fly again. Is that correct, Dave?
Yeah, I don't think it will ever have air under its wings.
Probably not.
Probably not. It's truly a revolutionary design. I mean, that's not an understatement in any way, shape, or form. They were, so advanced in their design philosophy. It's pretty amazing that, it's happened in the 30s and the 40s. And
yeah. Well, speaking of revolutionary, Derrick, you mentioned this topic was suggested by one of our listeners.
Yes, Chad, one of our listeners requested this. That's correct.
That's really, really cool. And how did he let us know that? Because other people might want to do the same thing.
He is a personal friend of mine. I got a text saying, "Hey guys, let's do this." So here we are.
How to get a hold of us. But people who don't have your phone number, which we'll be sharing with everybody later, I'm positive. But even if we don't share it, they could find us on all the socials, which I know we'll review here, and let us know if you have something that you want us to review and talk about. Man, we love it. This was one that I did not know much about. I've seen it myself. I've taken pictures, but as far as a deeper dive and conversation, what a great idea, Chad. Thanks for sharing.
Absolutely.
Definitely.
Enjoyed it.
You can find all of our social media in the description down below. Make the request by email. You can record feedback there. We're on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. We just arrived on TikTok. I don't know if you guys noticed that or not.
I did. I'm impressed.
We made our arrival. We landed on TikTok. Look out.
It's all over.
I know. And speaking of photos, David Rowe over at Aerophile, what you got going on over there?
Well, I have just returned from BNA Airport, Nashville International Airport. Had a family wedding in Nashville. Spent a couple of days over there in between the wedding activities, spotting. So got to see Maryland One from Southwest, and got to see former President Trump's Trump Force One was parked on the ramp. Oh. So I've got some photos of that I just put on my Facebook Aerophile page. So you can run over there and check those out, and we'll have some videos up in a little while from all the Southwest airlines. There's a lot of Southwest that flies out of Nashville.
Loaded over there for sure.
Yeah. So I got a bunch of those, and we'll have some new videos up on my YouTube channel. So aerophile.com, come check me out.
Well, we're getting tired of seeing all your P8s anyways, so I'm sure you're happy to have some new things to shoot, right?
Absolutely. I do enjoy the new thing. I got to shoot a Hawkeye. We had a Hawkeye fly over me today.
Oh, cool.
Yeah. So that was a nice little catch.
Those are awesome. And to you Poseidon crew members, we love you guys, and keep flying over Bristol and anywhere else you want to, but we'll keep taking pictures.
Absolutely. You fly over, I will take a picture of you.
Absolutely.
Definitely, for sure. And Dave Gorman, where can folks catch up with you on social media?
Well, Gormania is my YouTube channel. My last name Gorman, and then IA at the end is Gormania. And I don't have any real recent video there from aviation, but I'm working on some things that I hope to put up soon. I made it out to Big E Tyson yesterday for a while. I'm sorry, Sunday for a while. There were, let's see, 5 Texan 2s out there that were lined up, and just sitting at Signature. And I waited a while and got to see them all take off and leave. And as I was getting ready to leave, there were 4 big Blackhawks. And you're going to have to help me, one of you guys. The ones that have the big refueling probe in the front.
Those are the 160th SOAR.
Yeah, is that the Air Force Special Ops?
It's Army 160th SOAR out of Fort Campbell, Kentucky.
Oh, well, there you go. Okay, well, good. But they came in and they from where I saw them coming in, they lined up really nicely, and I got a couple of cool pictures of them all flying directly towards me in a nice grouping. So that was kind of fun. But cool to get out there and take some pictures. The spring weather has me thinking about air shows. There are a couple of good things coming up on the schedule. And Derrick and I have been talking about some long range things that have been pretty excited about too for the show. So we can't wait to share those things too.
Definitely, I enjoyed it, guys.
Absolutely, can't wait to do it again.
Thanks so much to Chad for the idea. And we have ideas, but we'd like to hear what you want to hear too. Folks.
Exactly, always open to request.
Yeah, there's a lot of aircraft out there.
Plenty.
God. We haven't gone back for episode 2 on any of these yet, but you never know. There's hopefully be a long time before we run out of stuff.
I hope so.
Yeah.
For David Rowe, Dave Gorman, I'm Derrick Beeler. Thanks for listening to the History of Aviation podcast.
This is Joe Morse. You are listening to the History of Aviation podcast with Derrick Beeler, David Rowe, and David Gorman.